It had been months since the accident. My sister had been in a coma ever since that terrible day, suspended between life and death. Every day felt like a cruel test, waiting for any sign of improvement, any hint that she might wake up and come back to us. We clung to hope, even as it grew thinner with each passing moment. The doctors were kind, but never made promises. They spoke in hushed tones, giving updates that felt like vague riddles. No change. Still critical. Stable but unresponsive. Words that became a broken record, looping endlessly in my mind. I tried to hold on, but deep down I felt something slipping away. One morning, the weight of it all became unbearable. I couldn't sit in that sterile hospital room anymore, surrounded by machines and tubes. I needed something else, something that could give me hope. That's when the thought of going to church came to me. The church had always been a place of solace for my family. My grandmother used to say that lighting a candle in church was like sending a prayer directly to heaven, a whisper in God's ear. I didn't know if I believed that anymore, but I was willing to try anything. It was a gloomy afternoon when I walked through the old wooden doors of the church. The scent of incense filled the air, and the flickering light from dozens of candles cast soft shadows on the walls. I made my way to the small stall by the entrance, where the familiar sight of candles and donation boxes greeted me. I bought 3, one for my grandparents who had passed long ago, and one for my sister's health. I stood before the altar, the air heavy with the weight of people's prayers. I lit 2 candles for my grandparents, murmuring a quiet prayer for their souls. Then it was time for my sister's candle. I lit the candle for my sister, whispering a prayer for her recovery, for her health. I watched the flame dance briefly before it flickered and went out. A cold wave of unease washed over me, but I brushed it off. The wind, I told myself. It's just a draft. I tried again. The candle caught the flame, glowing softly for a moment. I stepped back, watching it intently, but once again the flame died. My heart began to race. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, an icy whisper of something I couldn't quite place. Determined, I lit the candle a 3rd time. This time, I cupped my hands around it, protecting it from any breeze. For a moment, it stayed lit, flickering gently in the dim light of the church. I let out a breath, feeling a brief moment of relief, and then it went out again. By now, my hands were trembling. I could feel something dark and heavy pressing down on me, a weight I couldn't shake. Why wouldn't the candle stay lit? Was it a sign? Was something wrong? I felt panic begin to rise in my chest, but I pushed it down, trying to focus. One last time, I struck a match and lit the wick, staring at it with an intensity that bordered on desperation. For a few seconds, the flame danced, delicate and fragile, but then, just as quickly, it flickered and died. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't understand what was happening, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. After a few long moments of standing there, helpless, I placed the unlit candle with the others, offering one final silent prayer. Then I turned and walked out of the church, my mind swirling with confusion and fear. The walk home was a blur. My thoughts were consumed by the image of that stubborn candle, the way it refused to stay, lit no matter how hard I tried. I wanted to believe it was nothing, just a coincidence, a strange fluke, but deep down I knew better. I felt something had shifted, something had changed. When I arrived at my building, the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. As I reached the top of the stairs and approached the door to my apartment, my phone rang. I fumbled with it, my hands still shaky from the church. I glanced at the screen and saw it was the hospital. For a brief moment, I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach, and my fingers felt numb as I answered the call. It was the doctor. "We're very sorry to inform you." His voice felt distant, muffled by the roaring in my ears. My sister had passed away, just an hour ago. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to breathe. It was like the world had gone silent. the air thick and suffocating around me. My sister was gone. Gone, just like that. I felt a wave of disbelief, as if I hadn't really heard what the doctor had said. It couldn't be real. She couldn't be gone. But as I hung up the phone, the reality of it settled in, heavy and cold. I thought back to the church, to the candle that wouldn't stay lit. A chill ran down my spine as I realized what had been happening. As I had stood there, desperately trying to light that candle, my sister had already left this world. The candle hadn't gone out because of the wind. It had gone out because her time had ended. The next day, I went to the hospital to see my sister one last time. The room felt different now. Emptier, even though everything looked the same. The machines were still there, the bed still neatly made, but there was no longer the faint hum of life surrounding her. I sat by her side, holding her hand, the coldness of her skin a sharp reminder that she was truly gone. I thought about the countless days I had spent here, praying for a miracle, hoping for some sign that she would wake up. And now, all that hope had vanished, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow. As I sat there, I remembered the candle once again. Maybe it had been a sign, maybe it hadn't. But I couldn't help but feel that the universe had been trying to tell me something that day, trying to prepare me for the inevitable. In the days that followed, grief settled over me like a heavy blanket. I couldn't escape it, couldn't push it away. It followed me everywhere, seeping into every part of my life. But along with the grief came something else. Guilt. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the church, about how I had struggled to light that candle for my sister. Maybe if I had tried harder, if I had stayed longer, if I had prayed more, maybe things would have been different. Maybe I could have done something to save her. Of course, deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was nothing I could have done. But guilt is a tricky thing. It weaves itself into your thoughts, convincing you that you could have changed the outcome if you had just done things differently. A few nights after the funeral, something strange happened. I had been struggling to sleep, tossing and turning in my bed, haunted by memories of my sister. I finally drifted off, but my sleep was restless, filled with strange, fragmented dreams. In one of those dreams, I saw my sister standing in the church, just as I had been that day. She was holding the candle I had tried so desperately to light. And this time, the flame was burning brightly. She looked at me and smiled. A soft, gentle smile that filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace. When I woke up, I felt different, lighter, somehow. It was as if my sister had come to me in that dream to let me know that she was okay, that she had found peace. The guilt that had been weighing me down began to lift, replaced by a quiet sense of acceptance. In the weeks and months that followed, I began to heal. It wasn't easy, grief never is, but little by little, I found a way to keep going. I visited the church again, this time to light a candle not for my sister's health, but for her peace. As I stood there, watching the flame flicker and dance, I felt a strange sense of closure. The flame didn't go out this time. It burned steadily, casting a soft glow in the dim light of the church. I realized then that my sister was no longer suffering, no longer caught between life and death. She had found her peace, and now it was time for me to find mine. As time went on, I couldn't help but wonder if my sister was still with me, in some way. It wasn't a rational thought, but grief has a way of making you search for meaning in places you wouldn't normally look. I started noticing small things, things that seemed like signs. A familiar song playing on the radio, a book we used to read together showing up on the shelf at the store, even the scent of her perfume lingering in the air when I was alone in the house. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, staring at the framed photo of us on the mantelpiece. It was from years ago, before the accident. We were laughing, arms wrapped around each other, carefree. I found myself talking to her, as if she could still hear me. "I miss you," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I don't know how to move on without you." Just as the words left my mouth, the candle I had lit on the table flickered, the flame bending and dancing in a way that felt unusual. I stared at it, my heart pounding. Was it a draft? A trick of the light? Or was it something more? For a long time, I sat there, watching the flame. I didn't know what I believed anymore, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my sister was still watching over me, trying to send me a message. The dreams came back. They weren't frequent, but when they did come, they were vivid. So real that when I woke up, it felt like my sister had just been there in the room with me. In one dream, we were sitting together on a park bench, the sun setting in the distance, casting everything in a golden light. She looked healthy, radiant even, with no sign of the accident or the coma that had taken her from me. "I'm okay," she said softly, turning to face me. Her eyes were full of warmth, the kind of warmth that only she could give. "You need to let go." I wanted to respond, to ask her what she meant. But before I could, she reached out and touched my hand. The sensation was so real that I could feel the warmth of her skin, the softness of her touch. And then, just like that, she was gone, and I was awake, my heart racing. I lay there in the dark, my mind spinning. The dream felt like more than just my subconscious processing the grief. It felt like she was trying to tell me something, trying to help me let go of the guilt I still carried. On the anniversary of her passing, I went to the cemetery for the first time since the funeral. I had avoided it for a long time, afraid of the emotions it would stir up. But I knew that if I was ever going to move forward, I had to face it. I brought flowers, her favorite lilies, and made my way to her grave, the weight of the past year pressing down on me with every step. When I arrived, I stood there for a long time, staring at the headstone with her name etched into the cold marble. It felt surreal, as if none of it could possibly be real. "I don't know if you can hear me," I began, my voice shaky. "But if you can, I just want you to know that I'm trying. I'm trying to let go, like you told me. But it's hard. It's really hard." As I spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees above. It was peaceful, almost comforting, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. "I miss you," I whispered, tears filling my eyes. "I'll always miss you." Before I left, I lit a small candle and placed it next to the flowers. This time, it stayed lit, burning steadily as I walked away, a soft glow in the distance. Over the next few months, life slowly began to take on a new rhythm. The pain of losing my sister never fully went away, but it became more manageable, less all-consuming. I started reconnecting with friends, going out more, and finding joy in little things again. I began volunteering at a local support group for people who had lost loved ones. At first, I didn't think I had anything to offer, but as I shared my story, I realized that my experience, my grief, could help others who were going through the same thing. Talking to them, listening to their stories, and offering my support became a source of healing for me. One evening after a meeting, an older woman came up to me. She had lost her husband the year before, and I had spoken with her several times. She smiled at me, her eyes full of warmth and understanding. "You're stronger than you know," she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. "Your sister would be proud of you." Her words hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Proud. I hadn't thought about it like that before. But maybe she was right. Maybe my sister, wherever she was, would be proud of the way I had fought to keep going, even when it felt impossible. As time went on, the memories of my sister began to bring more comfort than pain. I still missed her every day, but I no longer felt weighed down by the guilt and grief that had once consumed me. I had learned to live with the loss, to carry it with me, but in a way that allowed me to keep moving forward. One afternoon, I returned to the church where I had struggled so desperately to light that candle. It was quiet, the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. I bought a candle, just like I had done before, but this time I wasn't filled with fear or dread. I wasn't trying to change the past. I lit the candle and placed it gently on the altar, watching the flame flicker softly in the dim light. It stayed lit, burning steadily as I stood there, offering a silent prayer, not for a miracle, but for peace. As I left the church, I felt a sense of closure settle over me. My sister was gone, but she wasn't really gone. She lived on in my memories, in the dreams, in the signs I chose to see. And as I walked away, I realized that, in some way, she would always be with me. Life would never be the same without her, but it would go on, and so would I.